Hi, good evening. I'm Tay Tong, and welcome to this evening's SIFA version 2.02 version of one of the online programs. And this evening, we are having with us three very interesting panelists who will kind of like share with us on they are doing in terms of the curation of their respective festivals, how they themselves as individuals are responding to this present COVID-19 situation. So with us, we have Juliet. Juliet is with the Kyoto Experiment. Tang Fu-Kuen, who is with the Taipei Arts Festival, and of course Jeff Kant from Performance Space, and also the artistic director for Fuse Box in Austin, Texas. And so I think I'll come straight, and here we are. And hi, Juliet, Fu-Kuen, and Jeff, and welcome to this evening chat.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm sure we're very happy to have you, and always interesting conversations that we have. So I'll just kind of go straight into it. And I will ask individually all of you to actually kind of like briefly introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about how you're working in terms of what was a festival like, and as well as how do you imagine the future of festivals? That's a big question to which we will come to at a later stage, right? But so, can I get Juliet to start, please?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Juliet Knapp, and I'm co-director at Kyoto Experiment, which is an annual international performing arts festival based in Kyoto. We largely program multidisciplinary live performance work, so theatre, music, dance, and everything in between. The festival has been going for 10 years. This year, 2020, was meant to be the 11th edition. And it's also the first year that I'm co-directing the festival alongside your forecast and Juliet as three. This year, so normally the festival takes place in autumn, but this year we've made the decision to postpone the festival to 2021, February.
Right, okay. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you. Now, Fu-Kuen, can I invite you to tell us, because you just finished your wonderful Taipei Arts Festival, which was so interesting because you were so determined to have a live festival. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about it and what you have been doing. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Fu-Kuen. I'm originally from Singapore. And Tay Tong, in fact, I have not finished my festival. I'm right in the middle of it. We've just completed 3 weekends, and we have another 3 weekends. And so far, everything's been good. We're very lucky, I think, both in terms of the pandemic management and also, being blessed to run the program, our festival live this year. Just a very quick introduction to Taipei Arts Festival. It's a city platform annual. It happens every year in summer, in August, and it stretches between 4 weeks to 6 weeks. It is a multidisciplinary platform that encourages experimentation of contemporary works for the stage. This is our 22nd edition, and we are actually in summer running concurrently with the Taipei Fringe Festival and the Taipei Children's Festival. And all these 3 festivals are co-organized by Taipei Performing Arts Center. So if I shift a bit to this side, you see the picture of our center, which looks spectacular, like a UFO of sorts. It will open officially in 2022. So all the work that we are doing right now is lining up, is kind of preparatory towards its opening, in 22.
Wow, fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. And my apologies for Quen, because the programming sounds so exciting. And then we've been hearing good reviews. So, yeah, great. Great that it's still ongoing. And Jeff, I'd like to ask Jeff to, I'm sure many of us know Jeff for his work in not just in performance space in Sydney, but as well as the curation that you've been doing for Fusebox in Austin, Texas. So, hi, over to you,
Hi.
Jeff.
Hi, TT. Thanks for having me. I should clarify, I'm definitely not the artistic director of Fusebox. That's Ron Berry, who's been the founder and the artistic director for 14 years. But I've been very fortunate over the last few years to be working with Fusebox as a guest curator. And that's come after a sort of 3 or 4 year curatorial exchange between Performance Space, where I'm the artistic director in Sydney, and Fusebox in Austin, which are geographically and culturally very, very disparate kind of places, but I think we have a lot in common in terms of our ethos of curation and festivals and live performance that's really been tested by this whole global pandemic kind of situation. But in Sydney, I'm the artistic director of Performance Space, which is really sort of one of the homes of the experimental arts in Australia. Performance Space is 35 years old and has a really rich legacy of being a sort of a home for artists who are pushing the boundaries of their art forms, who are looking at creating new kinds of ways for audiences to experience their work, and particularly that idea of the encounter or the live encounter, and looking for new possibilities in what that is. I guess since I've been the artistic director of Performance Space, I've actually moved our program from a program of year-round presentations of visual arts and theatre and dance and experimental performance works into this model of an annual festival called Live Works. And we moved to a festival model for lots of different reasons, to create a sort of more artistically robust platform for the work. But also for us, it was about being more outward looking and being more national and international in the work that we did, and creating kind of more conversations between artists and peers and collaborators, particularly from across the Asia Pacific region. So we've spent the last 5 years building a lot of partnerships, relationships with artists and other festivals and other organizations to try and, I guess, create a little bit more dialogue and exchange between the experimental arts in the Asia Pacific region, and create sort of more mobility and dialogue around the work that we do.
Great. And this year for Fusebox, it was it entirely a digital festival? It was, right? Was it?
Yeah, it was not supposed to be. So for the last couple of years, essentially Fusebox invited me to guest curate a program of Asia Pacific work in their 2020 festival this year, which we've been developing together for a long time. And the Fusebox festival was always intended it was 5 artists who were going to take essentially live performance works to happen there as part of the Fusebox program in April. I guess April was the month that we really all went into lockdown globally. And so it was really in the final months when we were about to deliver this program. The catalogue for the festival had been published. We'd finalised all the travel arrangements and the tech specs with the artists. And then what happened in March was this situation where the pandemic really spread very, very rapidly across the world. And the situation was evolving very, very quickly. So the decision was taken, obviously, when international travel ceased and cities went into lockdown. It was becoming very, very clear that we couldn't hold an in-person festival anymore. And it was entirely Ron and Anna, the artistic director and the associate artistic director of Fusebox, who are absolutely wonderful curators and balls of energy. decided that they didn't want to be, events were being cancelled around the world, and Fusebox really didn't want to be defined by a sort of cancellation or the idea that all of that work had just sort of evaporated. So they moved very, very quickly to create a whole new digital festival online. Not to reproduce the works that they'd planned to present in person, but to create a different kind of experience where the artists and the audiences, if they chose, might produce something different.
Yeah, and how was that whole experience for you? But maybe Rafiq, do you think that we could see the other two panelists, Fu-Kuen and Juliet? Yeah, thank you. So that I feel that this can be a conversation, and both of you please jump in and ask each other any questions and all that. Yeah. So just to kind of pick up very quickly with what Jeff has said, how was that experience? Having kind of a digital presentation in terms of a festival, and how does that will that influence you in your upcoming festival in LiveWorks in October 2020 in Sydney?
I mean, I think at the time, in March, April this year, a digital platform was the only way to create a sort of live performance experience. And so I think it was like very, very generous of Fusebox to pivot and to create that digital festival, almost an entirely new festival that was created and delivered and curated within about a month of the in-person festival being cancelled. So we were all running on adrenaline, really. And I think at the time as well, the world was really going into lockdown, and it was a new experience for everybody. And there was a lot of fear around what kind of world we were moving into, how long we'd be locked down for, when we'd be able to gather or travel or even be in a room together again. So I think there was a lot of generosity around the way that people engaged with this digital platform, and for artists as well, who are sort of a lot of the artists that we were working with don't make work for digital media. So the invitation was very much about please only take this opportunity if it's valuable to you at this point in time. And frankly, a lot of artists were just trying to survive at that time. They were trying to not be evicted from their homes, or look after their families, or keep their sort of stable jobs for income. So it was really about who was positioned in that moment to be able to respond, who found it to be an exciting invitation, who had room for it, and who had a work that they felt might translate online in some form. So really looking around, not trying to replicate an in-person live experience, but for sort of us as curators and the artists who we were working with to really be curious about what you can achieve online, maybe that isn't possible in real life, or what are the possibilities of these new technologies that we're starting to use, Zoom and live streaming and all of these different kinds of platforms that we're becoming very quickly acquainted with. What kind of possibilities do they hold for a sense of liveness and a sense for people to actually connect with each other in a genuine way? And I think, for me, one of the fundamental tenets of festival making is creating that space for connection between artists and audiences, but between audiences and each other. And that creation of community through a festival, I think, is something that's very important to my curatorial practice. So it was about what kind of connections can we make with each other in this online space.
Yeah. And was that connection fabulous? Did you feel that it was you managed to have that connection? And then I'm going to ask Juliet, because Juliet spoke a little bit about intimacy last night. I mean, for our audiences, last evening we had a kind of a trial, a technical trial, but then at the same time we went off on having that conversation and discussion. So yeah, Juliet, maybe after after Jeff.
Yeah, I think what we discovered was that people were like the format was a live stream, essentially, that people were live streaming in from various locations around the world, and there were sort of the chat functions that come along with Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and that chat function became a place where you bumped into your colleagues, and could convert, and you had that sense that you were sharing a live experience together. And I think there were some things that really surprised us. One of the really successful events was a studio visit with the artist Justin Schoedel, where he took us into his studio with some of his collaborators, showed us the sort of materials that he was working with, gave sort of sample sort of short performances, had a sort of very informal dialogue with his collaborators. And being inside an artist studio is not something that's possible on a mass scale with an audience in real life. So there were some really interesting new possibilities that really sort of surprised us about what is actually possible in that medium.
I see. Fabulous. Yeah. And Juliet, you spoke a little bit. We spoke yesterday about this whole idea of intimacy. Is it possible to have intimacy online, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as Jeff said, like Fusebox is one of the first festivals to go completely online. So it was really like a massive experiment and really interesting to watch, what was possible, what was not so possible maybe sometimes. But I think that's what's great about, what it was. It's an experiment. So, that it was a really great example and amazing how it was pulled together so quickly. And I think the two big things I took away from watching Fusebox was I realized that an online platform can offer a lot of intimacy. As we talked about yesterday, it brings, as Jeff said as well, it can bring the audience into the artist's studio, into their process. So instead of perhaps having the performance itself online, we can connect an international audience to that artist's process in a different way, which is not possible. And the other thing I took away is obviously the way that the online can jump across borders of countries. So the international audience that was tuning into Fusebox was, you were saying, Jeff, that you had like lots of people from different countries. You were checking the numbers of how many people from different locations were tuning in, and that was,
What was super interesting, was that I think we found that the overall audience for the virtual festival was a much more international audience than can obviously travel to Austin to experience the festival in person every year. And so this idea of the different ways that you can connect communities across the world sort of in real time was very exciting. And I think one of the highlight performances I remember also was the closing performance by Ingrid Diorama, which was a dance performance that was a sort of 5-channel screen with dancers in 5 different locations and geographies that you watched sort of simultaneously. So that sense of, as a viewer, bridging not only time but different spaces and geographies and witnessing that in real time was quite exciting as well.
Great. And Fu-Kuen, I really like what you wrote in your festival brochure and your the artistic director's message. You wrote this. An emergency program to respond to the biggest challenge: how to maintain the theatre as an essential site of assembly and human encounter, and not turn digital online as an easy option. So, could I have your take on this whole approach towards digitalization for a festival versus having a live performances, which your festival is so determined and it is very live. So would love to hear your view and your take on that.
First, I should share that my program was already set 8 months beforehand, which means that by December 2019, I had set half my program, and then by February the full program was on, right? And of course, the pandemic really struck only in March. And it became very clear by April that I had to scrape off half of my international program and to come up with a new set of program, what we have called the pandemic program. This was particularly difficult because still we are living in very unstable times. We are not able to, let's say, predict what will happen beforehand. Oh dear, am I frozen?
We can hear
Can you hear me?
you, so don't worry. Yeah, we hear you beautifully,
You can hear me,
Fu-Kuen.
yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on now. Yeah. So half the program had to be scraped off, and so to come up with a new program was still very precarious, simply because we couldn't yet forecast what was to come. And so continually, all our perceptions and plans are being undermined or being made unstable and precarious. So what happened was that I decided to come up with several possibilities that could speak both to the live enactment, to the live possibility, and also to the live and digital communication. Yeah,
I think
can
we
you hear
have
me,
lost
Tay Tong?
Fu-Kuen. Now we can. Yes, you're back. And now you're
You can
gone.
hear me. So
Now we can.
okay, where was I? Where was
I think you were talking about
I?
how to have the international and how you had to rethink your program. Yeah.
Yeah. So to rethink a program within 2 months was a huge challenge, you can imagine.
Yes.
So what I then set out to do was to test out several possibilities. One, to cater to the eventual live enactment. And then the other was that in case we had to still go online, what were some of those live slash digital interventions we could make. So I was very lucky. The artists that I quickly got in touch with were mostly game to come on board to try this new experiment. So with Jerome Bell, which the festival has been working with in the past 2 editions, I decided to give him the carte blanche to say, hey, Jerome, since you decided last year not to ever travel by flight again or to send your assistants overseas, what could you do with us this year? And so he elected to make a collaboration with the dancer Chen Wukang. And this is entirely via the idea of the dance score, which he scripts, and then he hands over to Wukang to interpret, to direct, and to perform it. So it's a solo piece in which then the so-called avatar, Wukang as the avatar, is entirely in autonomy to fulfill this score. Then there is, of course, the other option that we made, which was to invite a Zoom performance to be staged in the theater. Yeah. So this comes from Isa Hoxton from the Philippines. And so she proposed that since her project is very much about the zoo, right, the condition of being looked at and being under lockdown in Manila, and as well as the kinds of animal performances in the Disney Empire, in the Disneyland parks, that animals are being anthropomorphized as humans. So she decided then to propose staging the Zoom performance on stage where the audience would have a live interaction with her. So what I'm saying is that in these 5 programs, these 5, and I'm not going to list all of them, but they are examples of what I call proxy or avatar performances. Yeah. So, like in the case of Yang Jun from Vienna with Mitch, with Michikatsu in Vienna as well. He's his pal in Vienna. Yang Jun is able to come to Taipei while Mitch isn't. So both of them have an online and offline communication during the live performance. Yeah. So this is the way, let's say, that I was really pushing for, to ensure that there was still going to be international presence in the program, in the festival. We couldn't all go either digital, right, full digital, or to go full local. Yeah. This has caused, needless to say, a lot of stress upon my colleagues. You can imagine. And then the costs, right? The costs involved. So, for example, we had Pichet Klunchen with his number 60. Both artists decided that they are willing to fly from Thailand to Taiwan and quarantine for 14 days, stay here to perform for 2 nights, and then to give workshops, altogether 14 days, and then to fly back to Bangkok for another 14 days of quarantine. So this, you can imagine, is logistically formidable in terms of the costs and the kinds of human effort and the kind of precarity, right, involved in organizing the flights to and back to Thailand. And so this, I think, while hugely challenging, is something that as an international festival, we insist to carry out, because we simply cannot bow down to the fact that we can no longer enter the theaters, we could no longer communicate or present global voices within the city, stages. And to go online, you know, for me, yes, it's always an option. It would and likely it would be a major operandi for us in the near future. But as long as we are safe here in Taipei and we can fully access, and we do indeed open the theaters in full capacity. And so long as we have this privilege and this blessing to do so, we would insist to bring our audiences to the charm and the pure magic of live performance.
Yeah. And I think that you also wrote very beautifully about how, you know, your artists actually have proposed very strategic transmissions and interfaces that mediates flows between the virtual, live, local, international, personal, public, past, present, and here, there. I think that statement actually encapsulates what you just told us. Yeah. But thank you very much, Fu-Kuen. And then I was just wondering whether Juliet and Jeff has any kind of a response to what Fu-Kuen has just shared with us, and especially when you all are both planning your next festival, Juliet with Kyoto Experiment, and then Jeff with LiveWorks in October. Yeah, so just to hear your thoughts a little bit. Then I have another question for the three of you about this whole sense of the international, right? Because a lot of the work that we do involves the international. So we'll come to that later, but, you know, just quick responses from Juliet and Jeff to Fu-Kuen.
Shall I go first?
Yes, and you want to go?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, for us, I mean, me and Yoko and Yu are appointed co-directors last April. So we've been planning this festival for over a year now, and it's still not going to happen until next year. But when the pandemic happened in, you know, February, March, that was when we had to make some kind of decision about what direction we were going to go in. And I think the reason why we have postponed the festival is because we do want to deliver the original program that we have decided we want to keep their promises to the artists that we've invited and their works that we've programmed and try and make that a reality. So I think, there's obviously going to be a time when we have to decide whether some of the program or all of the program needs to go online. But as much as possible, we are working towards, making sure that the performances happen in a live space, in a theatre space,
Yeah. Jeff.
And I think for us, as Juliet was saying, Fusebox Virtual was such an experiment, and some things worked and some things didn't. It was sort of so fast and furious. And then, the other thing that's evident is that it was never intended to be a replacement for a live festival. I think we are all sort of hooked on liveness, and we're all doing what we do because it's around this that happens. That's when bodies share space together, and this is one of the fundamental tenets of live performance, but also of festival making, this sense of a shared space and what can't be replaced from bodies physically sharing a space together, and a sort of embodied presence between the audience and the performer. So we here in Australia, we're moving slowly out of a sort of lockdown stage, but in the midst of a second wave here, which means that when LiveWorks happens in October, gatherings will be possible, but still at a very, very restricted level of social distancing and vastly reduced kind of capacities within venues. So we're really thinking it's like there's this sense that we are all, and the artists that we're working with are so keen to find a way of having that shared space together, that we're really looking at a combination this year of in real life physical events that are working around these kind of social distancing and capacity restrictions that are put upon us by the pandemic, and then works that are online. And we've made a very deliberate decision not to try and replicate those in-person real-life performance experiences online, but to commission work separately for physical spaces, and then specifically commission works for online spaces that sort of continue that curatorial investigation we started with Fusebox in lots of ways, and look at some of the unique qualities or collaborations, the artists that might not be possible in physical space. So there's one performance that we're commissioning by two First Nations artists who are in Sydney and New York, and perform together durationally every day online. Is sort of something that was specifically conceived as a work to be created and presented online. But then when we're thinking about the in-person performances, I actually have a lot of faith in particularly experimental performance artists, because, those artists are in the business of gathering people together. That's the medium in lots of ways, and crafting that encounter in a particular way. So, people are at sort of different speeds and levels of interest in sort of adapting to this. But a lot of the artists that we're working with this year, that gathering of people is kind of the form of the work. And within those parameters of social distancing and small numbers and, a different sense of time, you can create a different kind of live experience for people. So, we're thinking about the works that happen in person this year. We'll almost use those restrictions as a provocation to see what's possible, actually, what we can create for audiences that's actually really sort of magical or transformative, or that actually allows us in this moment where we haven't been able to gather in so many ways, and that it keeps sort of getting postponed and delayed when this might be able to happen again. We were really adamant that we wanted this festival to be a platform to bring people together and just sort of imagine where we are right now, and imagine, because I think the future is still so unclear. We don't know what's going to happen next week, let alone next year. So how can we create a space as a festival that at least allows people to come together and ask those questions collectively?
Yeah, yeah. So, but maybe it's a good time now to kind of address that the question, right, that we've been asked about. We're supposed to be speaking about, which is the future of festivals. Jeff, you just talked about it a little bit about, well, the future is so uncertain, and we all kind of like talked about it last night as well. That means that everything is so uncertain. So how do you even plan? And so how do you even imagine a future of the festival, or what the future festivals look like? Yeah. So
well, I think
feel free to
for
weigh
me,
in. Yeah.
imagining the future has almost become the sort of investigation of the festival, because we don't know and nobody can say with any certainty. So how can we be led by artists, actually, who've always been in the business of imagining the future and imagining alternative worlds? And at this point, I can't see a more important time to be an artist, actually, in terms of dreaming about alternatives, dreaming about alternative versions of our present reality, or speculating on what the future might be. And so, yeah, for me, a part of me is also conscious that touch wood, hopefully this pandemic will pass. We just don't know what that process will be, but hopefully we can say that in some, whether 5 years, we're able to touch each other again, and we'll be able to travel again and see each other. So in a way, it's like, what is that present? How do we deal with the present of festivals, and how do we deal with the present of culture and that uncertainty, knowing that, maybe 1 year isn't actually long in the grand scheme of history, and that some of those prevailing forces of globalism and the way that the world works will be very keen to pick back up again as soon as they're able to. So I think, rather than the future, it's sort of like, how can we live in the present at the moment?
Right.
I think,
Yes,
yeah,
Juliet,
I think
please.
also because of the pandemic, there's many, practical issues of traveling and getting people into theatres that have to be, that cause barriers. But at the same time, the pandemic has itself revealed like problems or issues that have been underlying for a long time as well. That I think that's not just in France, but in general. That's like, social, political, and environmental issues that were already there. And I think when we talk, I think Fu-Kuen yesterday was saying a little bit about, when we think about the future of festivals, we need to think about what the function of a festival is. And so when we think about, what is the role of the festival in contemporary society in the future, and what are those deep-seated issues that the pandemic has revealed as well, and how should the festival react to that, is interesting to think about, even if the pandemic didn't happen, in a way. For us, I mean, we started thinking about our first edition of the festival last April. So we were already really thinking about these questions last year from April, like, what is the function of a festival? What has Kyoto Experiment been doing for the last 10 years? What should we continue? And what should we change about the festival, and why? And two of the main things that we realized that I think we wanted to focus on was refocusing on the festival, refocusing the local as an aspect of the festival without losing the international, but making sure that we had like a real local connection, and we were learning more about the context of where the festival is. I think international performing arts festivals now there's like a very well-oiled machine where artists tour, and to a certain extent that's really great, but then to a certain extent you often go and it's the same kind of audience watching the same kind of work, and it's like, how much is this work really connected to the place that it's being performed in? And I think for us, we were asking questions about, okay, how can we reconnect to our locality? So we basically decided to, instead of just having like a main performance program where we present works that we've produced and works that are touring, we've decided to kind of split the program into three. So we have three main programs which will be showing parallel. One of them will be a performance program where we'll be showing work that we produce and also touring work. But another program will be a kind of research program, and that will be focused on researching the Kansai area, which is a region in Japan that includes Kyoto, but also Kobe and Osaka. And we'll be inviting local artists, about 2 or 3 local artists, to research, choose a topic about Kansai and research it with local citizens, as well as like researchers or other experts and also producers. And then this is kind of a research process which has no goal. So it's not like they have to produce a work at the end of it, like a residency style research process. So we'll kind of go along this quite long 3-year research process with them and share this process with our audience as it happens. And we hope for that process to kind of to be stored online. So we'll create a separate website and it will have all these articles and videos and to share the process with our audience. And we hope that kind of library that builds over the years will be used by other artists as well. Perhaps like one of those research points will be a starting point for a work by an international artist. So I think, this focus on the local is really important. It's going to be really important in the future, and how we can really connect to our locality. But at the same time, not ignore the international connection that we need to continue, that we already have.
Yeah. Great.
It's very interesting. I'd like to kind of catch on what Juliet was saying about this whole emphasis on the local. This year, I decided to approach 2 Canadian artists residing in Taipei. And they are Cheryl Chung from Canada, Hong Kong, and Yem from Canada. So both Canadians, residents of this city, have their own points of view. And I was just thinking, instead of always looking out to look for international artists, what about turning in to look at where the international lies within the local? So I think the festival has been very lucky to have these 2 artists. They were so deciding to look at the sewage plant, which our office is actually situated.
Fu-Kuen,
Very office, we talked about the sewage, and they then decided to actually look at the neighborhood, which we ourselves have tended to neglect. So, and then they made an expanded cinema piece with sound and film, and then a walk through the sewage plant, and then through the nature park before arriving into the artificial box. And then that's what the piece is called. That it's the concrete box. And so what I'm saying is it's always interesting how the pandemic, the conditions of the pandemic, what it has given us, makes us look always to all kinds of other solutions or people or communities that are around us that we have not perhaps been really looking at. And they could constitute that international and that global, So next year, for instance, I'll be looking quite a bit into the migrant communities living within the city and outside of Taipei City. So this is, let's say, really a reawakening to the deep local, which in fact then reconnects us to the global.
Yeah. And I think it's a really wonderful, I like that phrase about how looking back internally to look into the international, right? I know there's a long list of questions, very interesting questions that is popping up. But I think that what we need to talk a little bit about and to share our thoughts about is about this whole complexity of local, international, and then internationalism, internationalization, and being an international festival. What does that mean, right? We all imagine that because of travel restrictions, we are not able to have international artists. Some festivals feel that they can't have international artists, but Fu-Kuen proved us otherwise because on different levels, in terms of, and also very much dependent on the generosity of the artists. For example, at Pitchet, who was willing, and his collaborator, who was willing to spend 28 days in quarantine to do this particular project. So how do you all feel about this whole sense of the international in the work that you do? Yeah, just thoughts.
I think we're still sort of so in the midst of in the aftermath of the first wave of, so it was only a few months ago that international travel became impossible. And it's been such a fundamental tenet of what we all do that I think, it's a matter of like this very fast pivot that we're all doing to address our programs in the immediate term and what's happening for our next festivals and what solutions we can kind of improvise on the fly versus what the sort of longer term structural change to what we do might be. So for me, the answer has really lied in research and creative development. And in this moment where it's impossible for us to, except in these kind of extraordinary cases that Fu-Kuen you've managed to pull off in Taipei with Pichet and the artists who've been able to travel in quarantine, what are the other alternatives when it's otherwise impossible to bring artists and colleagues? And I think just leaning into these networks that we have and staying connected, through conversations like this that happen both publicly, like we're having now, but privately between us as networks to be continuing to sort of share information and compare notes, but also finding ways to support artists to keep creatively developing this work, because I think we're all sort of artist-led in our approaches in different ways as well. And so thinking about, well, actually, how are artists responding to this, and what do they see as their role in this kind of shifting kind of world? We've just started this program called sort of micro fellowships, which are these small creative development grants that we've given out to artists from across the Asia Pacific region to experiment with their practice in the context of the current restrictions on, sort of rehearsal rooms not being able to operate in a similar way, or people having to practice at home in their living rooms or online or via technology. And so that's been an amazing way for us to support artists from all over the place, including Val Lee from Taiwan and Natasha Tonti from Indonesia, to kind of create projects or experiments within the parameters that they're sort of having to deal with at the moment. And for us as an institution to play a role and stay connected to those artists. So I think, this kind of, I think this for us, it's really been like leaning into research and creative development in order to sort of to really rigorously explore what the possibilities are at the moment, and let that inform what next.
Yeah. Juliet?
Well, I should share that initially I was hopeful that the travel bubble logic would somehow maybe. Can you hear me? Sorry, am I interrupting?
We missed you. We missed you a little bit, so you got to start again. The bubble logic.
Sorry. Yeah. So at first I was a little bit hopeful that we could ride on this, like at least within Asia Pacific, right? That we could form our cozy little travel bubbles, and then, that our artists could safely travel back and forth, right? But of course, this has just overnight burst, this logic, right? It is no longer tenable. And so I think what this, let's say, like when we have a rarity, such as Pichet, being able to travel, or being able and willing to travel to us, that the next time when such a gesture is shown to us, we would make sure to keep this artist as long as we can, to keep him, and so that he or she would be able to do the research, right, and build yet another project in that time, or for the future, to ensure that his or her presence is cherished and maximized, optimized to the fullest. So one person I could share, for example, is Choi Ka-fai from Singapore. He had entered Taipei in early March, just before the lockdown. And then he soon realized that it's more dangerous for him to travel back to Singapore or back to Berlin, where he's based, and therefore he then it's very nice, I just stay on in Taipei. And without knowing, he has stayed here now 5 months. And in between, with Ka-fai, instead of doing one new premiere for us, why don't 2 new works? And so he did. And so I think, he was very pleased to and generous, needless to say, to offer this effort. And we were also more than overstretched, actually, because we were already, in terms of budget and in terms of power, and in terms of, let's say, the hours of making the premiere in situ, inside the theatre, is limited. So, but no matter the result, which is good, right? Although it could be even better, no matter, we are honest to the process to say that this is what it means for the future. That when we receive an artist, we want this artist to stay, to build more projects for us, and to fully utilize his or her time, and then we be brave to present this to the public. The public, conversely, should be wise and appreciative to know that such conditions that we are now in means that international works and collaborations and premieres are going to be so rare, and we need to cherish and to hold them tight, and not lose that connectedness to the world.
So well said, Fu-Kuen. And Juliet.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about being as flexible as possible and trying. I think in the future, as there's going to be, it's going to become more and more difficult to present international work. So I think it's about working with the artist as closely as possible and really seeing what kind of tools the festival as a platform needs to provide to make that happen. And I think a lot more flexibility is going to be necessary in the future. So I think that's why as well we decided to make these kind of 3 different programs. So that's also to do with like the funding structures as well, and thinking about how we're not try and create this flexibility for that to be used in different ways and things like this. So I think it's that's the most important thing, I guess, because it's going to take many different forms and shapes. So it's about what kind of tools and weapons do we have to prepare as a festival to be able to make that proposition from the artist happen, I think.
I think that I think that what this part of the conversation is that I think we are evolving and in a way of developing what you call tools. But actually, I think that what we are also responding to, how we're responding to this particular situation, actually has, given us a lot of kind of a very positive, I feel very positive outcomes, like what Fu-Kuen and Jeff and Juliet, you're saying in terms about moving ahead and the future. Because I think that what has made us, I think that the when we are in this moment of evolving and evolution, we are constantly reflecting on what was happening for us in the past and in the present, and what to keep and what to treasure in moving forward for the future. And I think that while the pandemic, I think is not something that we wish for, but I do feel there is a sense of hope and positivity in terms of the futures of festivals. Yeah. Okay. And now I think that if you don't mind, I'm going to have the questions flood in for you all to take. And there's a lot of questions about going digital, blended approach, about festival, about digital fatigue and all that. So, but we'll just take it as we come along. And I thought that should we start with Aaron's Fernandez question, Jimin? I think it's as a good starting segue into this Q&A. It's supposed to...
Well, sort of answer.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean,
so Aaron, yeah.
Just to, I guess we're like living that right now in terms of having recently announced a sort of festival structure that is a mixture of digital and physical. And I think it's a year that's necessitated us, whether we sort of embrace it or reject it or cautiously enter it, to reckon with the digital as an experience. That is a sort of one of the, was a few months ago, one of the only ways that we could actually share live performance. So, we're looking at a mixture of physical and digital, and how, as Fu-Kuen was saying, those aren't actually binary forms either, because the experience of watching something digital is an embodied experience. And, we're at the edges of experimenting how, for one of my favorite events in the digital Fusebox was a dance workshop where the artists got you out of your seat and moving. And at a time where we were all locked in our homes, just the experience of being embodied and in a movement, in a dance performance, connected to other people around the world was really incredible. So I think, we're kind of quite keen to see what else is possible, but also knowing that there are certain things that you just can't replace from a physical live experience. So doing at the same time everything that we can this year to make that possible, even despite restrictions in numbers or social distancing measures, that actually it's super important that, we hang on to this this passion and this curiosity and this expertise we all have that is centered around live embodied experiences of body sharing space together.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think before, as I was saying before the pandemic happened, when we were preparing for this year's edition of Experiment, one of the things that we were actually talking about was creating better online content, not using the online just to promote the festival, but really creating content online for the festival. And we were thinking, in terms of that content, we were thinking not necessarily works or performances as such, but the research program that I mentioned before. We were thinking about really ways of sharing that process online with an international sharing that very local research project to an international audience. So I think there's definitely space for festivals in the future to have like a well curated online space. That doesn't mean like, I think that doesn't mean like we should, you know, put all live work online. Like there's definitely stuff that can only be done live, and I'm, you know, that's there's the magic and that, but I'm not so precious about being like it all has to be live, and therefore, and if we bring in like online streaming, then it ruins the magic. Like I think there's so much opportunity and there's so many things that could be done, and I think don't have the tools quite yet to be able to do that. So I think for us, like, you know, creating like a video team within our festival gives the option for artists to create work in different ways as well. It's almost expanding the boundaries of what is possible inside our festival, while still also protecting, you know, what it means to show live work and be in a space together, not forgetting that.
Right. Okay.
I would like to respond by saying that performances will go on, you know, no matter what happens, right? Or no matter what will happen. But we can also do a festival entirely online, digital, no problem. But I would like to say that for certain platforms, especially festivals that are tied to a venue, right? Or even companies that are running a venue and have to depend or be obliged to filling up these venues, they will face a difficult situation then. In this instance, I would say that, hello, yes?
Yeah, we missed you actually, a huge bit. Fu-Kuen, are you there with us?
A huge bit. One thing is, in short, is those festivals with what that are tied to venues, such as we can imagine the Esplanade or the National Theatres in Taipei or the Carriage Works in Sydney, etc., etc. Those with venues, they would have a much more difficult time, right, in terms of you know, answering to the funders, to the stakeholders, if the venues are not filled, right, by the festivals. So I think it needs to be understood by the various governments, by each government, and by each city council, by each stakeholder involved in running the venues, to understand that when live events are possible in the future, they must not be bound to those same criteria for evaluation from the past. Yeah, they cannot be any more viable in this current moment. And I think a lot of us who are in these venues, right? You look right behind me, will be a huge venue that will be born in 22 with up to 2,500 seats. How would we be able ever to hit those KPIs, right, of the past? And I think each government must realize and accept and the challenge of being flexible with us, and to really hold it till a moment when the pandemic gets better or is over, or perhaps would never ever be over. And so what, you know, it means perhaps then each night we can really only play to 50% of the house or less. And this demands a real recognition, you know, a real recognition of the times and and the impossibilities, and to not put more pressure upon the curators and the programmers to come up with plans that cannot actually be conceived or be implemented. In reality.
I think
sorry. Juliet, go ahead.
it's interesting, this idea of being kind of married to a kind of space. Like, so if you're a theatre and you're programming for a theatre, you know, like it's very, I think it depends on how the festival is structured and what kind of partners you have. But I think often a festival can be more flexible than theatre in terms of the way the organisation is structured. Because for us, obviously, we have partner theatres, but we're not like really tied to a space, and we have this office all year. But you know, we're not like married to a space. So I think the beauty of a festival in some ways is that like it can be flexible in that way. It can really experiment, perhaps more than a theatre space.
And I think what you've just shared actually kind of segues quite nicely to Lisa Lip's question, which is that there seems to be a lot of pressure now for artists to create work for online. How do you thread the line of what the festivals or funders' requirements are versus what the artist's needs are? Maybe we can quickly address that and then move on to there are two questions on this kind of the same topic, which is about the audience appetite for digital programming. Has it grown or has it waned? Yeah. Would anyone want to begin with? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, it's good to like acknowledge that here in Australia, a lot of that real push to go online did come from the funding agencies and from a sort of institutional perspective. And I think particularly when we sort of think about live performance, you know, really we've been curating projects for physical spaces. And so you know, I think I just want to be very mindful of that opportunity is not going to be relevant or of interest to all artists. And, you know, and at this point, I think for a sort of artist who makes performance, like pausing to reconsider your practice is just as valid a response as creating work for an online platform. And, you know, maybe there are other opportunities this pandemic affords, which is actually like a space of pausing and of reflection and not of production or response. And I think all of those are sort of valid responses to the situation. So I feel like it needs to be driven by the practice. And if there's a curiosity or an excitement about the possibilities of that medium, and I think, you know, it's a very evolving situation. And I think earlier this year, for lots of people, making work for online was the only option if you wanted to make work that was going to be seen in the earlier months of this year. But yeah, that's not of interest, and it doesn't sort of suit everybody's practice, and it's just not of interest to a lot of people. So I think making online work is one of many different kinds of responses to this current situation, which could be about retreat or repair or healing or research or creative development or you know, other things that fuel creativity in different ways. And I think that our sort of institutions and our funders need to consider that whole spectrum.
Right. Any other thoughts to this question?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's, you know, the artist's job to respond to what's happening in contemporary society. So, and if that response is not online, then you know, that's totally fine. Obviously, like there's different ways to respond, and the multitude of those responses should try and, you know, be able to accept those multitude of responses and support those responses.
Right. Okay.
in these times, in these last few months, been mentoring artists through online funded platforms, and in the course of speaking to them, they have expressed, of course, a lot of anxiety about two things, right? And we managed to split into the predicaments into two points, which can be distinctive from each other. Right? One is survival, right? Artists who have been used or who depend on full-time practice to survive, to make a living, right, would find this pandemic the most threatening. It's almost like going jobless, right? So they would be the ones who feel very much compelled to stick on to production, to keep on producing, because the aim is to survive. Right? And of course, with the digital fatigue that we've been speaking about, this is very apparent that you can't just keep producing for online, right? So that begs the question then: how do you, as a smart living human being, deal with your daily survival apart from theatre, apart from art making? So I think you are no different, dear artist, from everyone who is suffering from the pandemic right now, right? People are losing their jobs as well. So you, Jolly, also have to think about what else you could do in order to survive.
Yeah.
So that's the survival question. So the other point is really about practice, artistic practice. Right? Artistic practice, if you're an artist, you have deep questions and you have developed appropriate methods to address those questions, you would find that you can go longer in exploration, and you can take deeper time to develop your practice. It doesn't mean that the theatre is closed tomorrow and therefore you stop your practice. Right? That is not what we understand as artistic practice. Artistic practice means that no matter the condition, you as an artist would find the appropriate methods and the resources and the collaborators to push the practice into the future. Yeah. So it may just mean that you can't take the straight road now. You just have to take a little detour, or you have to maybe step back and then retrace where you were going instead of moving forward. But this question of the artistic practice then can only deepen and make you clear about why you are in this thing called art making. So I think that it really needs a lot of resilience, a lot of deep thinking, reflection, and wisdom to accept the prevailing conditions, to both survive and to continue to sustain an artistic practice.
Right. So, given the fact that kind of like picking up the point from you, Fu-Kuen, I think that Ke Wei Liang has a very interesting question for all of us, which is that are decentralized festival blueprints the way forward in post-pandemic era? Because, well, I mean, we've been talking about resilience, we're talking about future, we're thinking about evolution, rethinking, reframing, moving ahead. So well, it's a good question, I think, and I'm being naughty by inserting it here right now, about decentralized festival blueprints. Is it the way forward in the post-pandemic era?
I think I need to understand more about the idea of a decentralized festival blueprint, and in a physical dispersion of the sites across multiple locations, or does it mean a decentralization in the curatorial structure, which I think we're already seeing with the experiment and the co-directorship model that's super exciting, Juliet, that you guys are sort of playing out at the moment. So yeah, I feel like I don't necessarily have a good grasp of what this decentralization is.
Right. Well, I'm not sure Wei Liang is still online, but if he is, please kind of elaborate a little bit further. I'm curious myself because when I was reading it, it's really, I thought, it's not just the physical about decentralizing, not just that, but are there other ways forward? Does it need to really have festival as a platform, or is it a situation whereby, it's a kind of a collage of different expressions? But while we maybe he will give us more insights to that. There's a question from Alfian quite directly for Fu-Kuen about he says that very interested in this concept of a proxy performance involving avatars. One critique of choreography is that bodies are used to execute a master artist's vision in an autocratic framework. Thus, the remoteness of master artists then grant more autonomy to the performing body.
I think when we choose to work with an artist who proposes such a means of carrying out his vision or his authorship, it is very experimental in that actually not so many artists such as Jerome Bell have tried with these such kinds of remote propositions. I cannot answer for it because as a curator, I found this proposition highly interesting, and it is actually following the dialogue and the commitment from the past 2 years when he decided to rehearse via Skype and not practice because of his ecological conscience, right? So I am really taking this proposition to its logical end from last year. So this year, the dancer Wu Kang, who had worked with him previously, decided to also come on board upon his invitation. So it is a contract between two artists. And as far as I understand, the contract has been very fruitful because of this build-up of the trust and relationship and understanding, the fidelity to what they are proposing to set up to do. I don't think it means like, oh, I'm the master artist, and here is my blueprint, and you carry it out as if you are my robot. It is not that understanding of the avatar, It is a human being at the other end receiving this score, and he or she has his autonomy to fight back and to resist and to reinterpret the score.
Yeah.
So this, I think, is best. Actually, this question is best answered by the artists themselves. And in our debrief last week, both artists have expressed full pleasure with this contract that they've built. And in fact, this has prompted Jerome Bell to consider if finally in the signing of this work, the authorship is also with Chen Wu Kang. So this year, they have arrived at this eye-to-eye authorship correspondence. So this would be very interesting, how future manifestations of this score would take place. It's not for me to project right now, but at least since it's coming from the artist, their conclusion as they wrapped up this project has been a positive one.
Right.
And it's been my work as a curator, my own ideological work as a curator, to ask where balances could be found, and where the conversation between cultures or and situations where the economy or the politics or the social conditions are not speaking directly to each other, how a conversation could still be carried out. Being in contemporary experimental work, I can only say that curatorially, I'm still trying this out. There's been some success, some questions, and some failures. So this is what I think being a festival curator of a contemporary festival must take up. These are the challenges, right? And only the artists who carry it out, build that contract, fulfill it, can give us the answer at the end of the day. So I wish that both artists are with me, or if perhaps they are online right now, they could also respond. But this is as far as let's say that as the initiator, I have tried my best to fulfill this project within its fullest conditions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you very much, Fu-Kuen. I think I thought that it's important for us to address this question and for your take on that particular question, which leads us to this whole thing about as you all are curators and festivals. Last night, I remember we spoke a little bit about what is the role, right? About how I think Juliet, you mentioned something about that festivals provide artists the platform to create work. Festivals curators are the ones who provide the nurturing and the tools and resources for artists to continually make work, create, and to create. Not necessarily just make work, but basically create. Now, we have one question from Lily Chung, or there's two parts to the question. Is that for the panelists, do you see more works that are intersectional of art genres, except, for example, dance and ceramic making? And then the second question is that in post-COVID deep local, will we see more works of forgotten pioneer or mid-career practitioners rather than being dazzled by a next new thing? I think that it could be a question for us in terms of how do we perceive, how do we curate, how do we make a work? Any thoughts to that question?
Just quickly, I would like to respond to the first. It is evident that being contemporary art curators, that we take on experiments. So we are necessarily going interdisciplinary, intersectional, asking where the most unlikeliest partnerships or intersections could be. So this is, I think, our continual work. I hope the pandemic will not blunt us in any way, that we will continue to transgress and to move forward. At least this is how I understand our work as curators, as contemporary curators to be. Then
I think we're
Juliet, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I think we're all in that sense on all of our platforms interested in interdisciplinary performing arts, and really thinking about where the borders of dance are, where the borders of theatre are, like what is theatre, what is dance itself, and what happens when a theatre artist collaborates with a visual artist. What happens when a visual artist makes a theatre work? I think that's something that Fifth Experiment has been doing for 10 years as well, and that's at the core of the festival as well.
Yeah, right. Any thoughts, Jeff? Or
no, just absolutely. I guess that's that space of experimentation and of colliding disciplines or sensibilities or ideas is sort of what we've had this long history of being committed to. I think all of us as curators, and it's also what sort of gives me a lot of faith in our capacity to respond to this situation, because we're all interested in the experimental, and the experimental means to voyage out into the unknown, and as Juliet was saying, to see what happens when these disciplines collide, or an artist from a particular discipline forays or collaborates into another. And so I think, that's what gives me a lot of faith that sort of artist communities that we work with are really essential responders to the situation at the moment, because that it's about, yes, it's about the resources and the physical tools to make work, but it's also about the drive to experiment and the curiosity around responding to the current moment and creating something, that is sort of contemporary, and that is a sort of situated in the present. So I think, that gives me a lot of faith in sort of not only the currency and the importance of art in this moment, but the capacity of artists to respond and to rise to the challenge.
Right. Well, William has actually come back to us about what he meant about decentralization. He writes, I was thinking about decentralization in terms of a festival spreading out its interactions with audiences in a more durational manner and over a more scattered, stretched out period of time, rather than just over the usual 3-week period. And we have a comment from Max Yam, who states, maybe using the digital medium is a form of decentralization, but for performing arts, engagement through the digital medium is still a big area to be explored. Any comments?
I mean, for me, when and this is a very personal response, I think, to thinking about what is a festival, and in that idea of decentralization being split out a long time, I think about what is the difference between a festival presenting a work and a work being presented at a theatre or a venue that presents work year round. And for me, it's this sense of critical mass and of conversation and of togetherness, and this kind of the possibilities of that very intensified moment of the festival that gives a lot of the power of festival making as a specific kind of curatorial discipline. And we've just actually made the decision to condense our festival from 11 days to 5 days, because that just feels a little bit more I think there's this question of fatigue, and this question of here in Sydney, where we're still sort of teetering on the brink of maybe another lockdown, and people feel very tentative about participating or gathering in public spaces. I think there's this kind of, at the moment, there's this tentativeness about that we feel like we don't want to stretch that or put additional pressure. So, we're moving to this more intensive short time that feels a bit more like a sort of a response to our current sort of moment. So, we're actually looking to, and that's just right now in terms of where we're at this year. It sort of feels like these kind of shorter engagements are sort of better for everybody's energy levels and attention spans than a more stretched out time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us at Kyoto Experiment, actually, normally the festival is 3 weeks over the period of a month, but for various practical reasons, the postponed festival next year will be spread over 2 months. And that was due to venue and artist availability as well, and us wanting to stick with the program that I originally had. And we're kind of threading the other, the three programs together and creating like a timetable in which we're really thinking about how the audience experiences that 2 months. So we're thinking about creating a break in the festival, and seeing how we could schedule things in kind of like clusters as well. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I think the festival in itself is like, like Jeff said, this thing of critical mass. Like it's this like impact. Like you have this one thing, bam, but you have to also think about how the audience can digest that, and over what time scales. Yeah, I think that's going to be different in different cities and locations.
Yeah, yeah. So much food for thought, right? I mean, there's so much to kind of like think about and so rich. Well, actually, our time is so for this panel is kind of up. So it just leaves me to thank all of you, Juliet, Jeff, Fu-Kuen, for actually being so generous with your thoughts and so generous with the all the views and the sharing that you have done in this past an hour and a half. And of course, I would also want to thank the audience, for being with us. But before we actually wrap, would you all individually would like to have some last words, at least for now, for this evening, not for the rest of our lives, but just for this evening? Any final comments? Yeah.
I think I'm just in this kind of very sort of pressurized, restrictive time. I'm even more convinced of the importance of gathering and the importance of festivals than ever. And I feel like it's a very bumpy road, and it will continue to be so for a long time. But I guess hearing all of you speak, I just really feel like we've kind of got this, as long as we have this kind of curiosity. And this is such none of us have the answers, but it's so important to keep asking the questions and to exploring. Maybe a festival is about exploring what in fact is possible and stretching the limits of what's possible from everyday life. And I think that's what we're all doing, sort of, with all of our festivals, our practices right now. So I think it's about continuing to be curious and continuing to explore what's possible.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge, but I think it's also really exciting. And yeah, it's just about, the festival, like I was saying yesterday evening in our talk, like our festival will happen. We just don't know exactly what it will be, but it will happen. So yeah, this idea of like preparing for something really unknown is obviously challenging and scary, but it's also super exciting.
But
Well, as for me, I still have half my festival to go. So far, I want to share that we've been opening the theaters at full capacity, and to date, we have several sold-out shows already. We are overall right now hovering around 75%, and hopefully by the end of the festival, we achieve 80% capacity of houses. And this is just to say that that I think the audiences long to return to it.
Yeah.
This is without a doubt. And we can go online, we can scale down the mode and sites of our performances, but to be able to reach and to be in assembly in the theatre is, I think, ultimately that many of us bear. And I hope this, our instance of the Taipei Arts Festival would give a boost to everybody's faith and confidence, and that one day we would be able to meet again and to be present to one another.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And I personally will remain very hopeful that I can experience your festivals um, in the future, in time to come, and in real life. I'm so looking forward to it. But I think that it is very important, like all of you have said, to keep hoping, to keep thinking, to keep reflecting, and to keep moving ahead and evolving without forgetting too much of what has been the past for us and the value of history in the past. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much once again. And so on behalf of SIFA version 2.020, I wish you and our audience a wonderful, wonderful evening and good night to everyone. And keep well, stay healthy, and always remain happy. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.